This conference will now be recorded.
All right, thanks everyone for joining today. This is the second in our book talk series. Today we're talking about being social and political, looking at our humanities and social science offerings. And we're going to start with a quick video.
The roots of our business are more than 175 years old. When our flagship journal Nature was first published 150 years ago, only a third of the world's population were able to read. Today, the majority can. Nearly 2/3 of the world's population lived in extreme poverty. Now most are poverty-free. And average life expectancy was just 38, where today that number is over 70. Yet despite this progress, inequality still remains, and the world faces new and significant societal challenges, such as climate change, universal access to healthcare, and quality education. Progress will only be possible because of the vital role that scientists, researchers, academics, and educators play. And in a world where truths are verified by social media clicks and fake news is easily spread, they are more reliant than ever on being able to share their insight and trust their sources. This is where we play such a pivotal role. As custodians of the academic record, we aim to safeguard the independence and veracity of research, helping researchers to trust and build upon the discoveries that have gone before. Each experiment, every finding, taking its place in the network of discovery and enabling researchers to stand on the shoulders of giants.
All right, so that goes on. And if you're interested in seeing more, please check it out at springernature.com about us. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Marit Bagstad. I'm the Trade Sales Director for the Americas. And we're very excited to launch this series. So my first slide, I just want to quickly share the mission of Springer Nature for those that might not be as familiar. And it is advancing discovery. We are really looking to connect researchers, educators, clinicians, and professionals to the latest insights across disciplines. We truly believe that science and learning matter, and you're going to recognize some of our key brands like Scientific American, Springer Healthcare, Nature Research, and Biomed Central as well-known components of our portfolio. Next slide, please. So as a company, Springer Nature is 5 years old. In 2015, portions of what was Springer Business and Media joined with portions of Macmillan Science and Education. We formed the Springer Nature Group. We have portfolios in books, journals, databases, and other services, and we're organized into 3 divisions: research, professional, and education. Everyone presenting here today is concerned with the books portion of our offering and sits within the research organization. A quick mention of Macmillan, because I know it can cause some confusion in the book selling and library spaces. So Macmillan Education, Macmillan International Higher Education, and the imprint Palgrave Macmillan are all parts of the Springer Nature Group. Any other Macmillan, such as Macmillan Publishers or Macmillan Learning, they are affiliates of ours, meaning that we share some common ownership under WholeSpring, but actually all operate as independent companies. Next slide, please. So we actually have the largest academic catalog available on the market, and I just wanted to quickly look at some of our key imprints to give you a bit of an introduction into what's in that catalog. A-Press on the right, we did a presentation of them last week, so if you missed it, please check out the recording, and we'll be circulating more information on that in the coming weeks to make sure it gains more visibility. A-Press is very much targeting developers and IT professionals in the tech community. Red Globe Press is part of Macmillan International Higher Education. They are publishing HSS textbooks and study guides. The Springer List is very well known in STEM subjects, but today we are going to have a sneak peek into some of the HSS content that Springer also puts out, which is quite important. Under Springer, we have the Copernicus imprint, which is popular science. Tune in next week. We're going to be looking at key popular science titles, and they are publishing astronomy, life sciences, ecology. subjects. And then Palgrave Macmillan is getting a lot of attention in our presentation today. This is our award-winning HSS imprint, that's Humanities and Social Sciences. And you'll hear a lot about politics and sociology in today's presentation. Next slide, please. And there's a lot of text on this slide, but the key point we want to make is that our crossover trade titles are accessible to a large audience and uniquely backed by the prestige of the Springer Nature brand. And diversifying our reach and recognition, particularly with booksellers and librarians, is really a central part of what my team, the trade sales team here, is striving to do. And to give that a little bit of context, there are 550 expert editors based around the globe that work for Springer Nature. Our books all undergo a rigorous peer review process that ensures their quality, and we address both popular science and global concerns. Next slide, please. And then when you think about what is performing well at any given moment on the Springer list, there's trends like textbooks that always get adopted and things like that. But I think what's a little more interesting in the commercial space is that our books very much perform in a way that ties in to what's happening in the world around us. So if you look at this smattering of books on the screen right now, you're going to see topics of sort of race and social justice, clinical medicine basics with what's happening in the COVID crisis, well-being, pandemics, economic turmoil, and a lot of other subjects in between. And I guess the point here is that we have a very deep catalog, 300,000 active ISBNs. It can be overwhelming, but we as a team are very willing and able to help you find the content you might be looking for your patrons or shoppers. So if you need suggestions, please reach out to us. Next slide, please.
All right, thank you, Marit, so much for the Springer Nature brand overview. I'm Jenny Liu, the Senior Trade Sales Manager for the trade sales team in the Americas. We are so thrilled to introduce our editorial colleagues to our book-selling colleagues today. I am also thrilled to have our sales team here with us today as well. You had met Marit and myself, and we also have Terry Yoshiuchi, our trade sales analyst, here with us. Sarah Lord, our trade sales specialist, could not be here today. And for the attendees on the call, we would love to get to know you. If you could enter your name and a little bit about yourself and maybe just where you're from, we would love to meet you and engage with you in our chat box area. And if you have any questions, please enter it into the chat box throughout the presentation, or if you'd like, we can answer them at the end when we open up the webinar to questions and from our attendees. So today we are thrilled to partner with our editorial colleagues from Humanities and Social Science in this virtual event series. We hope that the book talk will be an opportunity to connect with the booksellers and librarians on the call today. We also want to share the latest trends from the HSS editorial team. And most of all, we want to share the books that we're very excited about. So kicking it off with staying social and political, here is Phil Getz, our senior editor from Palgrave.
Thanks very much, Jenny. It's nice to see everyone and nice to meet you virtually on this beautiful day. So just a few words about the Humanities and Social Sciences at Palgrave. The Humanities and Social Sciences Division deal with prevalent topics that animate our current discourse, timely issues of the day. Our lists include key titles and publicity highlights on subjects relevant to a wide range of readers. It really addresses, like I said, the primary discourse of our age, the zeitgeist, as you could say. And as you can see at the bottom, some of the titles that are listed address some of these issues of race, issues of Me Too, gender issues. And a lot of our titles have won awards across all disciplines. And a lot of the humanities and social science lists are by nature interdisciplinary and intersectional. They approach these questions of race, gender, and sexuality from a variety of angles and often communicate between one another, between the humanities, different different topics within the humanities, different subjects within the humanities, including literature, history, culture and media studies, philosophy, religion, and the social sciences, sociology, anthropology, psychology, and political science. And so I think that that provides a relatively broad overview of what we do in the humanities and social sciences. And I think we're going to be moving to my colleague, Mary Al-Sayed, Sociology and Anthropology Senior Editor.
Hi, thanks, Phil. Yes, as Phil just shared, I am the Senior Editor of Sociology, Anthropology, and Migration at Palgrave Macmillan. On this slide, I think we have a really good representation of how we show who we are and what our main concerns are to our primary audience of academics and researchers, but also more broadly. So the most current of these is definitely our Black Lives Matter content hub, which has gathered content from around the business, from our magazines, journals, and of course our book publishing, in order to comment on the Black Lives Matter movement, but also Black issues and concerns more broadly. And this hub includes free to access chapters, so we can really help spread this important work beyond the researcher community. Two other representative campaigns featured here are U.S. elections and politics and social movements. U.S. elections and politics features content largely from my colleague Michelle Chen, who's on the call today and will speak a little bit further later on. And it discusses, of course, the ins and outs and controversies around the U.S. elections, again, with a lot of great free content, as well as discount codes to purchase books and things of that nature. The Social Movements campaign, in my view, is a really good example of the kind of cross-disciplinary work we do. It features a lot of content from my sociology list, but also from our humanities and especially history list, which has a great reputation in the history of social movements, as well as of course, the politics list. And although there's no photo of it here, the last bullet point touches on our sustainability community, this super robust blog and news platform that features contributions not only from our authors, but also external contributors. One of the reasons it's so important to us now is that it is tying the humanities and social sciences with the physical and biological sciences to help us achieve the 17 United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, which for many of us editors is going to become a key goal for us in the coming months and years. So I'll hand over to Michelle for the next slide.
Hello, everyone. I'm having trouble with, there we go. Hi, everyone. I am the senior editor for U.S. Politics at Palgrave Macmillan, and in this slide, I'm just going to talk about some of our key authors in our programs. So across our imprints at Springer Nature, we have quite a few high-profile authors. We've published really prestigious academics who are renowned in their field, like Professor David Graeber, who's the author of a classic text in anthropology, which means that if you're an anthropology student, chances are you will read his book, and Dr. Alicia Moreland-Tapuya at Harvard, who is an incredibly influential physician and also an advocate for BIPOC mental health and criminal justice systems reform. And these are, of course, just two of the many scholars that we work with who are real leaders in their respective areas of research. Additionally, while the bulk of our publishing is in research monographs, we also attract an author base that goes beyond just traditional university professors. And two examples shown on this slide are former Ambassador Dennis C. Jett, who served during the Clinton administrations and has published several books with us, as well as former Ambassador Anthony Luzzatto Gardiner, who was Obama's ambassador to the EU, whose book I will actually be discussing a little bit later on. If we could move to the next slide. So over the next few slides, I'll be discussing the U.S. politics program specifically and showcasing some of our key titles forthcoming and recently published. And while I will be focused on the U.S. politics side of my program, I also commission in political theory. So I'll touch on a few of the books here and there on that side, and there's obviously some crossover as well between U.S. politics and political theory. So our U.S. politics program works really hard to engage with current events in contemporary politics from a diverse range of perspectives. And what that means is a range of scholars from all angles of the academic debate and also diverse methodologies. So we have some quantitative books as well as some very qualitative books, and then also diverse author backgrounds. I had mentioned earlier that, while the bulk of our authorship are traditional academics, we also have a good number of authors who are practitioners as well. So for example, diplomats or active politicians, as well as what we like to call pracademics, which are academics that sort of professionally straddle that line between, your typical college professor and people who are out in the field, working in their areas, whether that's in government and in a policy think tank or elsewhere. And the first two books actually shown on this slide are really good examples of this. So Alison Dagnes, who is the author of Super Mad at Everything All the Time, used to be a former producer at C-SPAN, and now she's a professor at Shippensburg University in Pennsylvania. So she's had real-world experiences with political media and is able to sort of bring that unique practitioner perspective to what might have been sort of yet another scholarly book on media history. And similarly, I had mentioned former Ambassador Anthony Gardner. So Stars with Stripes is a memoir that we published earlier this year from Tony Gardner, who is, as I said, the former U.S. ambassador to the EU under Obama, who was replaced by Gordon Sondland after President Trump's inauguration. So while this book is a deep dive into some of the core issues in U.S.-EU diplomatic relations, it also really does give that sort of insider look at the life of the diplomat and what their jobs actually are and the sort of inner workings of the Brussels and Washington political scene. And one of the trending topics in U.S. politics is, of course, presidency studies, which has really ballooned in the last few years as a subdiscipline, as the role and power of the president continues to expand during the Trump administration. And additionally, identity politics, as well as race and representation, are two other key areas in U.S. politics, especially now. And to that point, we're really lucky to have Duchess Harris on our list, who's a professor at Macalester in St. Paul, Minnesota, whose book Black Feminist Politics is actually now in its third edition with us. And if any of you are familiar with the premise of the movie Hidden Figures, Duchess's grandmother was actually one of the, quote, first Black human computers at NASA. So she's done really interesting work on the long neglected contributions of Black women to NASA and to scientific progress in the US more broadly. And finally, it is July, so the Supreme Court is front and center on everyone's minds, which is another key topic that I will go over in the next slide. So we're really excited to be coming up on the third year of our SCOTUS Decisions series, which is a series of short books that cover the most important cases of the Supreme Court every term, edited by Professor Morgan Marietta at UMass Lowell. And the idea behind the series is that the Supreme Court is such a huge part of U.S. politics. And while the bulk of what the Supreme Court does is statutory, every term there are cases with pretty significant consequences for our lives and for U.S. politics more broadly. But if you aren't a lawyer and you're not familiar with all the legalese, it can be really hard to read those court opinions and sort of parse out exactly what that means and what those decisions mean for you. So we like to think of these books as a sort of, here's what you need to know this year guide to the Supreme Court. So they're fantastic for student use in courses, but they're also really readable and specifically designed for a general interest audience. The books also cover key developments on the court, so not just cases. So in 2018, for example, we covered not just Masterpiece Cake Shop and other sort of landmark cases, but also the troubled confirmation of Brett Kavanaugh to the court. And in this slide, I also just wanted to quickly highlight one of our more academic series here that kind of falls into the political theory side of our program called Global Queer Politics, just to showcase some of the series that we're really championing in identity politics. These books are all academic books, but the three that are shown here are all out in paperback now, and they're just really wonderful books, albeit a little denser and more theoretical than our standard trade titles. We could move to the next slide. And finally, I just wanted to highlight a few more titles, and I'll start with SCOTUS since we were just talking about the series. But the 2020 volume is estimated to be out later this fall, and we're really excited. If you've been following the news, it's been a pretty blockbuster year for SCOTUS. I think it's telling how much the court is rising in public attention every year, because every year we've done this series, the editors have said to me, I've never seen such a busy year on the court, and this year it's absolutely no different. This book will cover the core cases that have been in the news lately. So you've probably heard a lot about the DACA decision, the LGBTQ discrimination decision, Trump's financial records, and many more. but it will also grapple with the new role of Chief Justice Roberts, who has been the deciding vote in a number of key cases this year that would have otherwise broken down along traditional liberal versus conservative lines. And we've always called it the Roberts Court because the practice is to call courts based on the Chief Justice, but the reality is that for a long time it's really been sort of a Kennedy court. So it's a unique moment in U.S. history when the Chief Justice is also actually the swing justice, and this book will grapple with what does it mean for us and what does it mean for U.S. politics more broadly when we have a Chief Justice who now holds this much power. Another forthcoming title is The Real Psychology of the Trump Presidency, which is a really interesting book by renowned presidency scholar Stanley Renshaw at City University of New York, who also happens to be a trained psychoanalyst as well. So the idea of the book is to bring together sort of both a psychology and a political science perspective on the Trump presidency. And as some of you may know, there have been a ton of books about President Trump's psychology and fitness for office, and Stanley is trying to bring a bit of a more balanced perspective to that. So for example, there have been books that, have diagnosed President Trump with narcissistic personality disorder, but Stanley instead takes a look at what he deems to be sort of the undeniably narcissistic elements in Trump's personality, but also looks at an alternate explanation and alternate motivations for his behavior and why he engages with what the author coins in this book as sort of the Fight Club presidency. And finally, I just wanted to highlight two paperbacks in our U.S. Politics and Political Theory program called Trump and Political Philosophy, just as an example of how, we do like to have a little bit of fun on the academic side of our program as well. So this is a 2-volume set that each book does stand alone, but they obviously pair very well together. And they may seem a little bit tongue-in-cheek, but they do also actually consist of really serious chapters that look at President Trump in the context of classical thinkers like Machiavelli, Spinoza, Plato, Tocqueville, Deleuze, etc. So they're really fun if you're a political theory or philosophy nerd. And I just really love the covers as well, which I don't know if you can tell, but it's sort of an outline of Trump speaking at a rally facing an outline of Socrates from the famous Raphael painting, The School of Athens. So just like a fun bit of anachronism there as well. And now I will pass this off to my colleague Phil to talk about his program.
Thanks very much, Michelle. Nice to see you guys all again. So as I said, I'm Phil Getz. I'm the Senior Editor for Philosophy and Religion at Palgrave Macmillan. I started off this slide with this question, who hasn't pondered the deepest questions of our existence? The reason I do that is that it really points to what the fields of philosophy and religion address. The deep questions of where we come from, our purpose, and the nature of life and existence. And the titles you see at the bottom of this slide exhibit these deep questions from new and innovative angles. Questions about the existence of God, the philosophy and role of race in human life, and how issues of gender are dealt with in religious contexts. Some of the trending topics in philosophy and religion at the moment include critical race theory, queer theory, post-colonialism throughout the world, futurism, which is the study of how technology changes us and our futures, and progressive theology, of which women and men in the Quran is a prime example. Moving on to the next slide, I'll tell you about two of our forthcoming titles, one of which, Mythology of America's Seasonal Holidays. This is a study of the mythology that underlies the seasonal holidays that we celebrate in the United States. Holidays like Halloween, Christmas, and New Year's, the mythological elements that go back generations, in some cases decades, in some cases thousands of years, and how that mythology addresses and informs how we celebrate these holidays, and what we can learn from them, and what we can learn about ourselves and the societies that came before us. Another forthcoming title is Thinking Through Climate Change, Philosophy of Energy in the Anthropocene. In case you're not familiar, the Anthropocene is a term that is used to describe the age of humanity, the age in which humanity is defining the globe and the planet and the future of the planet in a fundamental way. And so this is an approach to climate change and the role that humanity plays in it. It's a philosophical approach to this question about how we as humans think about energy, what energy actually is, and how it actually plays into the climate change debate. The author, Adam Briggle, has actually written a philosopher's field guide to fracking, a very big issue in the climate change debate. It's a best-selling title that was covered in the New York Times. It was reviewed in the New York Times, and he was interviewed all over the media for this study. And so we're very glad to be publishing him come November. And I'll also be passing on the next slide back to my colleague Mary.
Thanks, Phil. Yes, this is Mary again, and once again, my program is the U.S. Sociology, Anthropology, and Migration program. So I've put my little tagline here as how we live in the world now and how we could do better together, because a lot of my list focuses on our mutual future and how we can get there better and in a more fair way once we understand each other a little bit more. My program is incredibly multidisciplinary. It crosses over quite a lot to politics and economics, but I also should have mentioned humanities here, especially from an anthropological perspective. It's really seeking to be quite contemporary, not only in topical subject matter, but also speaking to really the latest in terms of theory and practice within the discipline. So occasionally the methodologies that feature in our book are really experimental or even controversial. So these are always really fully vetted by peer review before they can make it to publication, of course. An example of such an experimental approach that's subject to a lot of conversation right now is the literary or creative approach to anthropology, which will feature quite a bit in the slides to come. My in-demand topics at the moment maybe are no surprise. There's a real renewed concern and interest in race and ethnicity studies across all lists, but of course in the migration list. There's a real interest in migration and how we ethically engage with migrants. And of course, digital and internet studies is a great theme for my sociology list, or even media sociology more broadly might be the theme. And just to briefly touch on the representative book covers below, I definitely want to mention The Rise of Victimhood Culture. It issued in 2018 at the height of the campus culture wars and just kind of immediately spoke to what people in the discipline and readers more broadly were looking for. I expect it to kind of shoot to the front of the list again, now with cancel culture on everyone's mind. So that may be one to watch. The next two titles are Islamophobia and Radicalization and Militarized Youth. The first is a political sociology title, obviously focusing on the relationship between Islamophobia and extremism. And the next, Militarized Youth, is a political anthropology book, and it is an in-depth ethnography of the children conscripted into the guerrilla forces in Colombia. The last, I Got Something to Say, is a great representation of the kind of publishing we do in not only race and ethnicity studies, but also media sociology, as it is a sociological discussion of hip hop and how it deals with the intersectional issues of gender and sex and class. So next slide, please, Jenny. Thank you. Up next, I've done a little bit of a review of our current campaigns. I definitely want to mention the social science team's flagship campaign, Social Science Matters, with the accompanying hashtag SocSciMatters. This long-running blog platform, not blog platform, excuse me, features contributions from sociologists and anthropologists that we publish. And what they're doing a lot of the time is taking their research and making it publicly accessible or tying it to the most topical issues of the day. So it's probably no surprise that if you go to it today, you'll see a ton of COVID-19 pieces and a ton of race and ethnicity pieces. It's a really exciting way that we push our audience beyond just researcher audience and branch out into the general public. This year, we're also dabbling with some exciting new initiatives, and we've just published our first podcast. In terms of campaigns specific to my list, I featured 3 along the bottom here. The first is a cross-disciplinary literature and migration campaign, which features a book called Tales from the Desert Borderland that I'll tell you more about on the next slide, but suffice it to say, it represents how cross-disciplinary we can be. The Sociology Subject campaign will also feature a couple of the books on the next slide. And what we do there with those campaigns is we make a chapter free to access to help make these sometimes intimidating seeming books more accessible to the general reader. And lastly, I've done a quick mention here that we are running virtual exhibit pages to compensate for our missed conferences. So at the moment, we're developing the one for the American Sociological Association, and up next will be the American Anthropological Association. Jenny, if we could go to the next slide. Thank you. So up next, I've mentioned Tales from the Desert Borderlands on the previous slide. This is a book that is really marrying a creative approach to anthropology with an in-depth ethnography. Larry Taylor is the author, and he's been working on the US-Mexico borderlands for decades now. In this book, he really embeds the reader on the border and shows us a full cast of characters of everyday border residents, and that includes migrants, but also restaurateurs and out-of-work people at spa towns that have been abandoned, ICE agents, and many, many others. In so doing, Taylor's really treating super familiar border themes like people smuggling or drug smuggling, but also dealing with the ambiguity and irony and humor that exists in the super diverse region on the border. And I do want to add, Taylor's fictional approach to this is not just a gimmick. It's actually a way around the real, practical, ethical concerns in representing, for example, children or the stories of those engaged in illegal activity. So it is kind of a necessary approach to this work. The following book, Getting Signed, is a book from David Arditi, who is a professor at the University of Texas at Arlington. David's actually been in the news a little bit lately as he's developed one-on-one, face-to-face courses for any international student at his institution that might be impacted by the new visa regulations. And this exact same spirit of like challenging power structures that don't make sense really imbues this book. Throughout, David is interrogating the whole spirit and ideology behind the record contract and why it continues to have the power it does today. He essentially asks, in a world where artists and musicians can reach their audiences directly and take payment directly, why does the myth of the record contract persist? So David interrogates this and breaks down the structures that maintain that myth, as well as discussing how it's often maintained to the detriment rather than the benefit of musicians. Up next on the slide is a book from one of the leading scholars of science and technology studies, James Paul Gee. He's been featured in NPR, New York Times, Guardian, and many other venues for his work on video games and education or video games and literacy. Here he's taking his decades-long career and is really exploding it outwards to interrogate possibly the biggest question in the world: what is a human? Throughout, he is essentially really masterfully synthesizing a huge range of sciences, the physical and biological sciences, with a massive collection of the social sciences, to argue that our institutions as they've been built, so our workplaces, our schools, even our governments, are built to reflect a vision of the human that doesn't actually exist. And he argues that if we understand what we really are, scientifically and socially in our everyday lives, we can build better institutions that more fully respond to the needs of humans. So it's actually a really hopeful book, although it starts from a place of everything is terrible and we might need to tear it down. And if you've ever been interested in a Jared Diamond or Yuval Harari book, I really think this is the next book for you. And the last book on the slide is a really exciting text from a young bioanthropologist named Rebecca Gibson. And Rebecca's here examining possibly the most exoticized and eroticized piece of clothing ever, the corset. And she's doing so at the time period that's of most interest to people, kind of 1700 to 1900, so including the Victorian era. And Gibson is taking narratives of medical professionals at the time, as well as women at the time, as found in magazines or personal correspondence, to see how everyday people of that era actually viewed corsets and how they did so in a very different way than we do today. She then compares that anecdotal data to bioskeletal data that she has gathered from the remains of women buried at St. Bride's Parish in the UK of that time period. So it's an incredibly unique, multi-scalar bioethnography of these women's remains and the effects of corseting on one's skeleton. But it's also at the same time investigation of Victorian fashion and contemporary corsetry and how we as people view women's fashion. So very wide-ranging and I think really exciting. And that's it from me. So I will hand over to Lilith to speak more the next slide.
Thanks, Mary. So my name is Lilith. I am the Springer editor in the social sciences team. I focus more specifically on psychology and cognitive science, which is a really fascinating interdisciplinary field. Cognitive science brings in all aspects of robotics, artificial intelligence, philosophy, history, anthropology, linguistics. And so I thought more broadly, maybe the best way to sort of frame my role on the team as an editor is cognition, behavior, and artificial intelligence, thinking about what it means to be human right now. So the social and behavioral science program is vast and varied. We've published at this point over 6,500 books. We have 600 individual book series. We do everything from psychology, criminology, social work, public health, again, cognitive science. We're a really great team. And I just wanted to talk a little bit about Springer, just because our focus is a little bit different from Palgrave. As Jenny and Myra said earlier, Springer's target audiences have historically been graduate students, researchers, and professionals in STEM fields. That's really kind of where Springer is most widely known as a STEM publisher. We have a really rich, vibrant history in the social sciences. I attribute that to the fact that our company's roots are in Germany, seat of psychology going back centuries. And the majority of our books, for that reason, are sold through book packages and digital libraries to universities and research institutions. But over the last few years, we've seen a really substantial increased interest from traditional trade readers and sellers in our books. I think that can be attributed to sort of a growing interest in the public and more informed readers. Everything's so interconnected now. Everybody wants to know more about their own psychology, mental health, mindfulness, and really the digitalization of nearly every aspect of our lives moving forward and the future of work. So people, I think, really want to know how to better understand themselves in order to understand the world we have to operate in. So in that sense, to keep up, Springer is publishing more zeitgeisty areas of psychology and artificial intelligence, written in really engaging, approachable ways by the top thinkers and voices who are bringing their academic expertise to a wider audience. Our authors and readers are international, and because of this, we're really able to find the researchers who are the best in their field to speak to specific issues like gun violence and criminal reform in the US, maternal health care and motherhood in China, resilience in Latin American migrant populations, and the adoption of social robots throughout the world for later in life care. As part of our foray into more trade-friendly books, I just want to highlight a couple of titles that we've published recently here. So the first is I Love You, came out of a workshop in Germany last year, covering what in sort of fun parlance is known as sex robots, but researchers call them social robots. It's a really fun interdisciplinary book. It's researchers from psychology, cognitive science, feminist theory, anthropology, technology. It explores everything from what would be sort of a feminist view of a sex robot, what is sort of the privacy and security issues associated with the data for one's social robot, and the history and future of the social robot and how they are currently being used beyond just, sort of the ones that make it into sort of the fun news articles. The next book that published earlier this year, Perspectives for a New Social Theory of Sustainability. The foreword was written by a Nobel Prize winning Italian economist. And this is a really great title. It's written in a really approachable, but also, I think, emphatic way of just saying that in order to approach issues of sustainability and climate change, we sort of need to look at how it's affecting society at large in a way that I think a lot of people, when they read about climate change in the news, may not understand how it's going to affect them personally. So then it makes it a little easier to ignore. But this book really drives home the immediacy of the issue. Telling to Understand is a really great Italian translation that just came out about a month ago. It's written in a really lyrical way. The writing itself is really beautiful and approachable, as you would expect from a book that talks about the impact of narrative on our personal memories. So it really takes kind of a Proust-Madeline approach to how we think about our own thoughts, and what that means for the stories we tell ourselves, and also what that means for how we represent ourselves in the wider world. And finally, Robot Rules is another one that talks about artificial intelligence and robotics and state of things as they are today, and what does it mean to sort of create an ethical robot. And if Jenny, you could take me to the next slide. These are some forthcoming titles I just wanted to highlight. Game Changer AI is a great book. It's really fun. It's really, the way he wrote it was just great. Klaus Henning is a German researcher. And so this essentially takes the stance that artificial intelligence and computers are the greatest inventions since Gutenberg's printing press for their impact on the world at large. And it kind of takes the stance of, we don't need to be afraid of this technology. We created this technology. We can take it in the directions we want it to go into. Robotics, AI, and Humanity, the next title coming out this fall, is a really wonderful contributed volume from the best people in their field, another sort of interdisciplinary approach, sort of the ethics of robotics, from everything from what does it mean to design an ethical robot to what are the ethics of using artificial intelligence in war. Changing pace a little bit, The Trap of Proximity Violence, also coming out this fall, is a look at gender violence, domestic violence, and resilience in female populations and victims of domestic abuse. And finally, from our criminology list, I wanted to highlight Sovereign Citizens, which I think is a really important book. It speaks to the rise of libertarian and far-right movements in the United States. This one specifically the Sovereign Citizens Movement, which the FBI has said is a domestic terrorist group. They essentially believe that the laws of this country were founded illegally and thus they don't apply to them. And so it's a deep dive exploration into the origins, philosophy, ethos, and psychology of the group, and sort of how they can sort of be handled in the future. And of course, we have many, many more books. If anyone's interested to see more from our psychology or broader social science list, please get in touch. So thank you. I'll pass this back over to Jenny.
Wow, thank you so much to the editorial team. I hope everyone found the information very informative and useful. And if you do have any questions for the editors, we can certainly send it to them or answer them at the end of the presentation. So a little bit more about Palgrave, Springer, and Springer Nature. There are ways to stay informed and to stay social with Springer Nature. We can here's our website, www.springernature.com, for new book previews, corporate announcements, and groundbreaking research. If you'd like to visit our blog, Springboard, you'll find there views and commentary on the latest innovations, on ideas and issues facing the world, and also research from the community as a whole, as well as books we're very excited about. And then if you look for at Springer Nature, you'll find us on Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube, and Instagram. For our bookselling colleagues, we did design a trade catalog to curate the books that really highlight our trade offerings. And this catalog, in this catalog, you'll find our upcoming books, recently published titles, our best-selling backlist, and everything that we had just presented in our book series. The trade catalog also includes our key publicity, marketing, and commercial-facing books. And the goal of this was to create something that was very accessible for booksellers and librarians. I know that we can, Springer Nature can have quite a large list. We publish almost 13,000 a year, but this is our true commercial facing books. It's a first glimpse at the growing trends and from the STEM and HSS world, and features backlist highlights in any given subject area from business all the way to the social sciences. This catalog is available on Edelweiss along with additional specialty and quarterly collections. And we do have a Edelweiss presence as well. We have at Springer Nature curated catalogs and a section that is completely dedicated to our bookstore and bookseller friends and librarians as well. In the curated catalogs, you'll find our quarterly key title highlights, our key front list books, imprint dedicated catalog. So Palgrave, Springer, Copernicus, you'll find all of it in there, and our category bestsellers. So everything that we had just mentioned, along with our monthly and quarterly promotions for print books. In the section for bookstores, this was specially made for you. We have our, just as I shown before, the fall 2020 catalog with our forthcoming and backlist highlights, our seasonal brand kit. This is an overview of all things that we do at Springer Nature on the book side, our new not yet published trade titles catalog. So this is everything that has a trade discount, which is much more targeted for bookstores as well. And then regional catalogs representing our West, Midwest, South, Northeast, and Canadian theme books. And I want to highlight today, because of the particular content matter from our editors, that we have a specialty collection for Black Lives Matter from Springer Nature. It is launched and now available on Edelweiss. The books in this collection amplifies Black voices and issues raised by Black Lives Matter. So topics such as Black culture, race and history, Black identity, and social inequality and ethnicity can be found here. And if you would like more information or just a way to navigate our catalogs, please reach out to your Springer Nature rep or the sales team for more guidance on our Edelweiss collections. And so we are all done today with our editor session, but we do want to open it up for questions if you have any. So I will turn off the recording